glove, high touch high touch experience to customers, the brand promise that those new customers came for will never be delivered if they continue to go that way. And so often companies have a brand promise that is, really not met. And that's kind of the other side of brand promise is customer experience. This is a brand promise. This is our promise to you. CX is, did we keep that promise, right? Did we make that? And so for me, one of the things that really helps a company is understand, look, just honestly, kind of, face the facts here. This is what your brand promise is, and this is where you want to go. Is that going to be a fit? Is that brand promise something you continue to deliver? And that's that gap, right? Is customer experience, the gap between the brand promise and what we actually experience in reality. That's customer experience.
Yeah, and I think that the brand promise, if I let me reiterate and see if I'm hearing you right. I think what you're saying is that the brand promise is in and of itself a set of heuristics. Like when in doubt about what to do. I know, say what you will about the actuality of this, but United Airlines, when they brought back the Fly the Friendly Skies, is it friendly was almost like a rallying cry for them as the principle to keep in mind is always be friendly. Again, reality notwithstanding. Other rules or heuristics? Michael, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to give you a chance to chat. We haven't heard from you if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm driving, so I can't do video easily.
Okay, focus.
Yeah, no worries. No, I think there's a lot of, just to kind of catch up, there's certainly a lot of pieces in here that CX, almost to, I think Eric was just talking about, we have to figure out how to blend, kind of connect all the dots, fill in all the gaps, right? So everything that we do is about the middle, right? And so how we do that, to your point of examples, you would hope that you can empower your teams to think on their feet, to not fall into the trap of the rules are the only ways to handle it. So how do you continue to encourage and I think like he talks about, set an example. So reward people for going off script a little bit and continue to encourage and then promote the success of what happens in that case. Like there have been plenty of examples, like Ritz-Carlton's we'll talk about. I remember reading the story, somebody left something in the room and the person they called the hotel and they figured out a way to not only ship back the book or whatever it was, they went and bought some extra things. It was for a little kid and made the kid so happy, and forever, of course, the brand loyalty of that experience is then promoted 10 times over, right? So Ritz-Carlton definitely does give a lot of empowerment, right? Other examples would just really be encouraging the frontline staff to, just to give them the power to do things and giving them the time to do them and not be worried about getting penalized for it.
Yeah, and I think I love the Ritz-Carlton example, and I also love there was something you said in there. I don't remember exactly what that triggered it, but one of the rules that I kind of use in my own life is focus on what you can control. And in particular for customers, let them know what they can control. Because we have this instinct as human beings, we want to choose. It might have even been in Drive. The instinct to choose is what we want, even when we know the choice that we make has zero impact on the outcome. We still feel that compulsion to choose. So even if you're in a situation, figuring out, is there something that we can let the customer choose? Would you rather hear back from us via email or via phone? Do you want me to call you, or would you rather have a refund back on this or that? Whatever it is, just helping customers feel like there is something that they can choose and can control That's one that I try to use in my own life and also in my dealings with other people. And Beth, you mentioned with kids, I know there's a classic, would you like broccoli or peas? Yes, you get a choice of which green vegetable you would like. And I think Ritz-Carlton is one of those examples of where they give people some choices of this is, this is the range of things that you can do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, it's that connection point, right? They giving them, just like kids, giving them a choice makes them feel empowered for something they weren't empowered for in the first place.
Yeah. Well, and I think the Ritz-Carlton example is also a really good, it triggers the hospital example in the beginning of the book for me. What is the emotional impact of this on the person, right? So the emotional impact of losing a stuffy for a 4 or 5-year-old and not corresponding impact on their parents versus the rest of us are like, oh, you lost a stuffed animal. It is a really big deal. And sort of acting in a way that is in concert with what this means or feels like to the customer.
Huge. Emotional pieces are huge. I mean, I think part of go back to why is this so difficult? Why do we need rules? Why do we have to go back and why the world functions in that? It's because our brains are, they don't really, it doesn't talk about the neuroscience, but seemingly there's a parallel between the neuroscience of our brain trying to always, make shortcuts, right? It's trying to conserve energy. So we're really forced to try to figure out how to put things in boxes so that we can save our energy for the dinosaur that's going to come and eat you, right? So it's fighting our natural inclination too, to do that. So how do you get out? That's why I was curious to see more about how you buck the trend, so to speak, and how allowing people to get out of their head, literally, so they can slow down enough to recognize it's okay if I'm using more energy on this decision because the output of it will be more valuable.
Yeah, there was a great example. I can't remember what company it was from, and I may not have known. They may not have been allowed to say, but there was a company that made a board game out of some of their key customer journeys. And so as a team, they would like roll the dice and it would come up with different scenarios. My fiance uses this with his business undergrad and graduate classes too, where they do scenario playing. And so it's this random combination of things that may or may not ever happen, but it's to give people the exercise of, okay, what if we had this weird situation with this combination of things? Pretend to handle it and then get some feedback and think about, okay, how would you actually deal with that? And that I thought was a really creative way to kind of hone that wisdom and build trust without it seeming too cheesy, like role-playing examples can often be. I wish I knew what company that was. Other examples, what about this last question? This one, I don't even know if I want to, thanks, Gary. Yes, I wish it was my idea, but it is, but yeah, I don't know. They were probably working with IDEO or one of those type companies. They're very good at coming up with those kinds of things. The last question, I debated whether or not to put this on here at all. This is partly about practical wisdom and partly about the limitations of incentives and rules. Tying customer experience metrics to bonuses and performance reviews. This is, if Jim Tincher were here, he would be standing up, waving a flag, shouting from the rooftops because he's very passionate about this. What's your experience? Does that work? Does it not work? I mean, this book talks about the limitations of incentives, but does it contribute anything positive, I guess?
I can on that one again. So in my experience, it does not work, but I would say in terms of does it deliver anything positive, I think it can be, and I experienced it being a way of affecting the conversation, trying to influence and change the culture. Whether or not the outcomes themselves are any different, the perspective, the conversation, the culture can be impacted by that. So we're focusing on the right things now. Like we've gotten oh, the squirrel's over here, go watch this one. Whether or not there's any impact is I've not experienced it working well. And Megan, you helped me try and get there. We did our darndest, didn't we, Megan?
We did our darndest to talk some folks out of doing that, but anybody else have experience with this? Eric?
Something I did a lot of work on as a CX advisory team member at Medallia. And we often had clients who, we've got this shiny new VOC system and we've got all this reporting capability now, and it's tied into, our Workday or, our whatever, our team structure is. And now we can incentivize teams and individuals and based on this. My personal take, probably not far from Jim's, is if you want to have anyone measured on that score, start with your CEO and the leadership team. Individuals and other teams should really be incentivized on those behaviors. And those behaviors that you want to see might be different based on where you are in your customer experience journey. Like some of those behaviors, the first 6 months might be a training incentive, like do these trainings or, go through these things, or incorporate a customer discussion or a customer story into every meeting you have. There are all kinds of things to help get the culture shifted. I think, and this also connects in with the book in terms of having some proscriptive things. Sometimes operationalizing things can help drive your culture. Your culture is not going to get there today, but it might start to get there in 6 months or a year, 18 months, or whatever it is, if you start operationalizing or requiring some of these things. So there are things definitely you can do incentivize to help move the needle. But I think start with executives. If anyone's going to be measured on a score, the top of the company is the right place to do it. And gosh, don't start doing it before they understand how they impact and how their teams impact customer experience. I was at a company where they implemented everyone in the company is going to have 20% of their comp, based on 20% of their what's the term I'm looking for? Not guaranteed comp, but their incentive comp, bonus. Thank you. Based on these customer metrics. People didn't understand why that was how they impacted it. No one trusted it. 18 months later, that was all taken apart and undone because they didn't approach it the right way. So it can be thorny to do. And usually, like in the examples in the books, drives the wrong behavior, right? I mean, look at all the automotive companies and, when you've taken your car in for service, look at how that is gamed and, because they're measured on that. I will say, and then I'm going to shut up because I talk a lot, but I was at a call center, a third-party call center in India a few years ago, and sitting there on the floor with headphones on, listening to the customer experience that was delivered by these third-party reps. Every time someone got a 5 or a 10 on their, how did that call go? Immediately following the call from the customer, there would be cheering in the office, an announcement and a celebration. If you were a customer on the call, you'd hear this cheering going on in the background. Like all of a sudden, every 4 or 5 minutes, this huge, cheer. That was great recognition. It was score-based and they loved it. And that was a huge part of their culture.
Yeah, the power of social incentives is, I actually think, one that we don't factor in enough. So I thank you for sharing that. I absolutely love that example. And Gary is using technology to say, yes, he agrees. Trust is built by everyone having the same rewards. There was an article in also in HBR recently about how Apple is organized for innovation. And it was fascinating. But one of the things they said is everybody at Apple, their incentive comp is all tied to the corporate level score. So they don't abide by but I don't control everything for that. Well, tough noogies. Nobody controls anything of everything they do. So that's that classic. It may not be your fault, but it is your problem. And really creating an attitude where that is a reality. Yes, the reality is you don't control everything, but you contribute. Beth, and then Hannah.
Oh, Hannah, go ahead. I already spoke.
Okay. No, I was just thinking about something that Eric said that I think the authors, I really wish they had pulled out more from Aristotle himself. So the part about understanding and informing the right desires to do what you need to do. So really in informing that at the base level, I think that's something that's very important to Aristotle himself if you read him. But and I think something that's would be important in a corporate setting for people to really think about why they're doing it. It's not just for the score, it's, you know, for the good, but it requires defining that what they call the telos, what Aristotle calls the telos, that end goal, and being very crisp about it. And yeah, that's something that I don't think, at least I haven't seen very much or enough of.
Yeah, and I first of all, kudos to you for being far more well-versed in Aristotle than I am. But I love
That was my previous life. I used to teach philosophy.
oh goodness, there you go. But what you just said reminded me of something that a mentor of mine once said. He said, when we think about business in terms of sales, you win or you lose. You get a sale or you don't. When we think about business interactions in terms of relationships, there's no such thing as a win or a loss. Every interaction moves the relationship forward, even if it didn't result in a sale. And that was kind of an earth-shattering shift in my mind of thinking about what does it mean to have a conversation with someone, be successful in a commercial environment. It didn't necessarily result in a sale, but it strengthened the relationship. And that's ultimately, you know, if you trust that, moving towards that right intent, then the other stuff, you know, will eventually come.
Megan, so for me, the question of the goal setting or the metrics ties back to the point that resonated the most for me in the parts of the book I was able to read was the example of the seminarian Samaritans. So where you're setting up the infrastructure around getting that outcome you want. So what happens too frequently is that we, you know, say, go be more customer centric. And there's an assumption in there, like, you don't want to be customer centric. We have to tell you to be. But the reality is your emotion is already there. Like, if people want to do the right thing, and is the infrastructure around it set up to allow you to do that? I experienced this in working with customer success managers quite a bit, where everything they brought up as an impediment to being able to support and do the right thing for the customers, we would jump in and try to solve. And that was actually really effective. So they would say, like, my customer doesn't understand this piece of the process. Great. We produced a one-page document really explaining in friendly terms what happens there. Okay, what's next? So as you set things up, people will see, okay, I am being set up for success. And then they will have the tools and the infrastructure and the things in place to go out and do that thing you want them to. So too often that corporate goal setting just focuses on the goal and not on the things that are needed to set up the path for it.
Yeah, I like that. And it makes me think of an example from my personal history. So I was accused of not being customer centric. Because I wasn't saying yes to every project that came in, because I had done that and burned myself out and ended up depressed and in a very bad place. And so I had to come up with my own heuristic of what does it mean to be customer centric. And the principle that I put in place for myself and then shared with other people was honor existing commitments. I have two customers. I have a customer that wants something new, and I have a customer that I've already committed something to. First and foremost, honoring the commitment I've already made is important. And if taking this new project would inhibit my ability to deliver for that other client, then that's a no. And saying, you know, I would love to do this work. Here's when I'm available to do this work. So also always saying what you can do. But this idea of giving people these principles to say, okay, if that's true, principles, tools, other things, nobody gave me that guideline, but I had to come up with that guideline for my own sanity, because I had to find a way to not just rationalize, but explain to other people, this is why I'm saying no. And it really is in the long-term benefit of all customers. Because if that customer were the person that I had made the commitment to and somebody else was coming along, that's what they would want me to do. So little behind the scenes baseball from my own life. Eric.
You just talked about something that, for me goes back to the brand promise issues. Sales teams are incentivized in ways to get them to sell, and they will invariably expand from their best possible target customers to those that are more on the fringe, right? And you end up getting customers come to you that are less aligned with what it is your product or your service offers and what you can do for them. How good of a fit that is going to determine how much of a struggle it is to keep them. And we see this in technology companies a lot. It's like, just sell anyone, we'll fix it in support. And that is, it puts you in a position where you end up having to spend time not taking care of the commitments that were, you need to take care of those commitments. It puts you in a position where they are more costly to keep or to try and re-earn again and again. And I'm really not seeing this well, but I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, Ryan Hart, who I used to work with at Forrester, just published a link to an article in MIT Sloan Management about this, about firing customers. And the article actually gives a framework for talking about when is a customer one that you should fire. And one is that they can't meet your needs, and the other, or that you can't meet their needs. And the other is that meeting their needs is too expensive, either from a cost, time, emotional angst perspective. Basically, they're just too high maintenance.
Yeah, that's a great point too. It's not just product fit or service fit, right? It's, wow, this is a really high maintenance. We've all been there.
Yes. And Gary, you're right. That will burn out support and success, saying sell whatever, and the support folks will figure out how to do it. See that a lot in professional services. The sales teams just sell it, and they're like, well, how are we supposed to deliver that? I don't know. Figure it out. You're a consultant. Go figure out how to do it. And yeah, I've never liked that. I'll share one other example from my own of the sort of principles. If you know me, you know I like little snippets and sayings, but not because they're clever, but because they're powerful. When I was 19 years old, I did an internship at Intel. And after I got done asking what an action item is, and they got done laughing at me because I had never heard the term action item at 19 years old, we had intense culture training for 10-week internships. And one of the core principles in Intel's culture, at least at the time, was assumed responsibility. I worked in a factory, the office around the factory and the factory, but they're like, if you see water spilled on the floor, you don't have to clean it up, but you assume responsibility for getting it at least one step closer to the person who can solve it. And it doesn't matter what it is, but when you see it, you assume responsibility for moving it forward. And I never realized how unusual that was. When I was at Forrester, someone was not where they were supposed to be, and there was a big queue of people waiting to get into a session at one of our conferences because there was nobody there. There was only one person scanning badges. So I grabbed a scanner and started scanning badges. And somebody looked at me and said, "You're an analyst. You shouldn't be doing that." I'm like, "I'm an employee. Why shouldn't I be doing this?" Or like going and finding the catering manager if the Caesar salad was out. And that's another principle that I feel like has always served me well and is not as common, but is it's a way to deal with a lot of the issues we have around accountability and not taking ownership. You don't own solving the problem, but you own at least getting it one step closer to the people who can solve it. I don't know if Intel still does that or not, but it had a big impact on me. Disney lives that when it comes to, yes, Disney absolutely does.
I feel like that also makes goals more shared too. And I don't know if that was kind of your point originally, but when you are looking out for someone else and someone else's kind of responsibilities, not to say that like you do that in place of your own all the time, you know what I mean? If you're doing something, you're doing something, but in helping someone else out, maybe they're more likely to say like, oh, okay, what are you working on? And how can we create like a more supportive like working environment and just make sure the job is done at the end of the day together. So I really like that.
Yeah. And also knowing, to your point, Sarah, who do I take it to get it one step closer?
Right.
FedEx found that when there was good team collaboration, it was because somebody on the team had been there for like 40 years, knew at least one person in every department. So they said, how do we build that structure even with new people? So they changed the new employee onboarding process to sort of introduce them to at least one person in all different groups, so that they would have a human being that they could go, I don't know if this is you guys, but we've met before. Is this you? Just to facilitate that person-to-person conversation and make people not afraid to or unable to reach out and figure out who to hand it to.
I love that.
I think even more important now that we're all boxes on a screen, or many of us are boxes on a screen. Anything else? We've kind of run through all the prepared questions, and I know this book is a little more philosophical, but anything else that people wanted to ask, talk about? Sarah, you mentioned wanting to have some more concrete examples of the application of this. Were there specific scenarios you wanted to kind of bounce around with people?
I think I mean, if anyone has anything in terms of collaboration and shared goal setting, I feel like that's, it being we're coming up on the end of like planning right now, but yeah, even ways to have conversations around shared goal setting, I think if anybody has actionable sort of ideas around that, that'd be helpful. But yeah, if you don't, that's fine too.
I have one that I'll share, but if others have some, I want to go first. You go first. No? Okay. So Sarah, one thing that an aha that I had at one point was this concept of aligning on shared goals is to a certain extent crap, because different teams have different goals because we divide and conquer, right? That's what we do. What we're really aligning is expectations around how much time somebody is going to spend helping me achieve my goals that they're not spending on their own. So it's not really that they're sharing my goal, it's that they're willing to spend part of their time working towards my goal and vice versa. And so it's not really about aligning the goals, it's about aligning the expectations of what that balance of self versus other is going to be.
I really like that. Yeah, and having like a certain amount of influence that makes someone else helping you appealing and willing to do that. So
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Eric, you had something you wanted to.
Yeah, two things on that. One is that we tend to be really bad at organizationally, and this is back to the long-term view, when we find some kind of goal alignment that does work, we often don't do a great job at ensuring that that continues to happen the next year or the next whatever. It can, but it often doesn't. And the other thing I would say is the only part of alignment really that I think is important to focus on is just making sure that goals aren't exclusive or in conflict, right? We see that a lot in organizations, especially even well-meaning organizations, where that just becomes accidental because things end up being top down, but not communicated across or back up and tested.
Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day about the concept of having a 2x2, an X and a Y axis. So you have something like average handle time or sales volume and sales quota, but then you also have experience score. And so the idea is you want to maximize sales while maintaining a certain level of experience. So if you could maximize sales, but the experience would suck because you were being pushy, that's not what we want, that it's kind of this parabola, I think, for lack of a better term, but this concept of having a central metric and then a bounding metric around it. I've only seen that done once or twice, but when it worked really well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Yes, optimizing for business results and customer needs. Yeah, ideally, if you can find something that works for both, you know, that meets customers' needs and business needs, then that's sort of the ultimate goal. All right. Well, sorry, I'm reading the chat. I think we've had a good discussion here. It doesn't seem like anybody has anything else that they really kind of passionately want to talk about. But I appreciate you guys coming. I appreciate your perspectives. I know this is a tricky concept, but not a tricky, it's an easy concept to understand. It's difficult to implement. But one of the reasons I chose this book is that I think practical wisdom is one of the most important skills that CX leaders are going to need going forward. And so I really just want to start a conversation in our space about developing our own practical wisdom. Forget about anybody else, but how do we learn to balance some of these competing factors? So I hope this will spark a conversation with other people about this concept, but I hope it was a worthwhile use of your time.
You know what? Sorry, I couldn't jump off mute quick enough before.
No,
I just have one. So I guess with that kind of last statement you just said, my question on this is to bring this into an organization. You know, have you seen where does this show up the most? Is this part of the culture conversation to begin with? And so if you approach it from a cultural standpoint, eventually, hopefully, if there's a culture already around, you know, the CX experience, then they go hand in hand, but it doesn't have to be obviously practical wisdom just for CX. So have you seen where this kind of approach, or have you done it yourself, where you start with a culture, you ask these difficult questions, you try to challenge people, your role model? So that's where I was wondering where all this was going. If we want to make this a movement, so to speak, is this in the culture conversation?
I think ultimately, yes, it is. The company that comes to mind when you said that is Netflix. Netflix has executives get up on a stage and debate each other in front of people. Partly because they want to expose everybody to the thought process and the mental trade-offs that the executives are making as they're making these decisions. Plus, they want to make sure that executives are, you know, sort of keeping things in a realm that they wouldn't mind anybody else hearing. That's probably the most stark example of this that I've seen. I do think it's a culture thing, but I think it can start in a very practical thing, like what is an appropriate compensation for a customer problem, or what is an appropriate concession, you know, for something, or what are the boundaries when we'll go out of our way to do something that we wouldn't normally do. I think you can have it in those micro levels, but ultimately this concept of use good judgment and then actually demonstrating what good judgment looks like and exposing the conflicts, I do think that's a culture conversation. Anybody else agree, disagree? Feel free to disagree.
It sounds like, yeah, there's no doubt you can do the small things first, right? And you're, again, what can you control? But then you might hit a ceiling. Like, again, if we talk about future versus current, right? If it's everything is done on short term because that's what the stock market wants, you're gonna have to do something different at a higher level, which is, are we gonna be able to really maybe divide up, maybe do 80% for short term and you start with 10, 20% for long term and experiment with that. But how do you get a culture that allows that level of balance at a bigger level too?
Yeah. Hannah.
At risk of sounding too nerdy with this, I mean, I think it's absolutely a culture thing, but I think it can start as small as possible. If you think about the Nicomachean Ethics, the point of it was to go into the politics, which he wrote as sort of a paired piece. And so it was, what's the individual's role within the collective, and how can we, be good as individuals, good virtuous individuals who work together first in the family unit and then in the larger units. And so if we imagine, instead of the city-state, the corporation, I mean, I think just because there may be limits in the corporate setting, because you can't roll it out immediately, or it would be very difficult to get it immediate and across the board. Even just with a team changing a mindset and the framework and the way you think about the problems, I think would be compatible, at least with what the authors and what Aristotle, if he were lived today, would think about how we start.
Yeah, I love that. And that's I don't think we think about it. When Eric was mentioning Japanese companies earlier, I was wondering how much of it is the more collective focus of Asian culture in general, that they're more focused on the greater good. So I think that's a perfect way to bring it around. But how do we draw out the fact that, yes, you are an individual, but you are an individual that plays a role in a collective? All right. Well, on that note, we are 1 minute beforehand. Thank you guys so much. I hope this was a worthwhile use of your time. Shockingly, we're going to send you a survey with 6 quick questions about the book and about the session. Feedback is absolutely appreciated and welcome. And our next session is April 5th, right, Kate? April 5th, I believe. And it's about Made to Stick, swinging much more back to the practical side. It's going to be, how do we take ideas and points that we're trying to get across and make them so that people remember them and repeat them. So back to the really tactical side from this time, which was a little bit more philosophical. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks for keeping me reading. Appreciate it.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Or
Should we,
listening.
Swapping out the coffee for wine because it's 6 p.m. on Friday here now. So
Yes,
cheers.
Eric is in France, so
Yes, right.
Oh, very
fun.
nice.
It's fresh.
enjoy. We'll join you in a couple hours.
Thank you so much for creating this, Megan. This was fun.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Good seeing you all.
Thank you
Bye.
all.